Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. India is now one of the fastest growing economies in the world. In terms of GDP, India has recently overtaken the United Kingdom. However, India's unemployment rate is at a record high. India's trade deficit is at a record high, and so is a prolonged inflation in India. So, what is the actual reality of India's economy? To talk on this, we have with us today a very distinguished guest, Dr. Arvind Mayaram. Dr. Arvind Mayaram is the ex-Finance Secretary of India. He has been India's alternate governor in the board of the World Bank, and he has also been India's finance deputy in the G20. Dr. Arvind Mayaram was in the board of the Reserve Bank of India and SEBI. So, Dr. Arvind Mayaram, a great pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks for making the time and joining this show, and a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
And I would like to see what this interview is about before we start. And that is, there are various exciting news coming out of India at the moment. And there are also a few alarming facts and figures that are also coming out of India at the moment. And for an average person, what to make out of that information. Where do you as an expert see the current trend of India leading it in the coming few months and year? And in some of the cases, what are your recommendations where you see fit? At the same time, for our audience, I would like to put a little context about you. You have been one of the chief policymakers and decision makers in India at a time when India brought out 250 million people out of poverty. And this was the highest anywhere in the world after China. But in your case, in India, this was done without any autocratic measures. It was done democratically, without any sudden disruptive and shocking policies put in place. So that was particularly phenomenal. So I would like to put that context about you before we start this interview. My first question is about the most burning topic in India at the moment, which is inflation. In June, India's inflation was at 7.01%. In July, it came down to 6.71%, and it is estimated by various other surveyors and experts that in August, it might have gone up to 6.9%. Now, inflation is there in other parts of the world as well. But do you think the drivers in India for this inflation is purely external, on which India has no control? Or do you think there are additionally any more structural problems that exist which might make India see something more alarming in the coming months? And also, even with this current rate of inflation, what do you see would be the impact on a country like India, which doesn't have a safety net for its poor people and average people as a developed country has, which are also going through inflation?
Thank you. I think you have your first question, of course, is perhaps the most burning question today, because apart from the fact that we can have an intellectual conversation on inflation and how it is composed and what drives it, the fact is that people across the country are reeling under the impact of unprecedented price rise. And it is, of course, combined with high unemployment and combined with loss of jobs and depreciation of rupee, so the loss of purchasing power, I think it's a very lethal combination that we are living through at this point of time. Now, the question that inflation, as it is being claimed, is basically external, driven mostly by the commodity prices and the oil prices. And much of it is attributed to Ukraine war. And also, of course, inflation in US and inflation in Europe and the problems that are arising from that. Having said that, I would also like to caution that we tend to, for far too long, we have tended to hide behind the excuses of external threat, external factors, external headwinds, and so on, while actually not looking at the real problems that we are having structurally at home. And these are very serious issues. So first of all, let's just simply see at the composition of CPI. I'm not going into all the kind of different inflations that we calculate, but CPI, which is the simplest consumer price index, which impacts most people. And this is interesting because in India, the CPI index comprises of three broad categories. One is food items, and this constitutes the largest component of our inflation calculation, which is about 46% of the index. And then we have fuel and light, which is electricity basically, with a weight of 7%. And then core is all other items, which constitute 47%. Much of the inflation is driven by food. And that's why it is impacting the poor the most.
Food are actually not imported, so it's not external, so it's internal.
That's why I was explaining. So I was explaining the structural problem with it. And the structural problem with this is that we have actually distorted the market through policy in such a manner that we create very large buffers, but we have never effectively used these buffers to be able to even out the prices. And this happens because in a democracy, the farmers' lobbies are strong, and food inflation, of course, benefits them to a great extent.
When you say buffer, sorry to interrupt, when you say buffer, what kind of buffer do you
I'm talking about the procurement that the government does and keeps in the FCI go downs.
Okay.
So our today, I think we would have about 20 to 23 million tons of, say, food grain, which is in the food stock buffer. Whereas our actual requirement for one season is about 7 million tons, which means that if the entire season fails, we would require 7 million tons to be able to meet that shortfall. So it is not external at all. I mean, it's all internal. But the remaining food stock that we keep, we are not being able to use it. We are not being able to use it effectively. And I'm not blaming this government, because this has been in the past too. When I was finance secretary, our inflation was very toxic and it was riding very high. And in the finance ministry, we were continuously pushing for releasing food grain from the food corporation go downs. Of course, in a calibrated manner, which meant that it was not meant for the market, food market to collapse, but just to cool the prices a bit so that the inflation expectations could be controlled. But the agriculture ministry would not budge. So the first problem we have is how to declutter the food market. And
if I may ask you here, do you think even today's situation can be improved if the food release is done in a systematic way, as you are suggesting, and today's inflation can be arrested that way?
Absolutely, it can be. Absolutely.
Wonderful thing to learn from this. I mean, this has been talked about. What do you think is the impediment in putting this in place? As you said, farmers, yes, but what is the impediment for the government to do this?
Because government comprises of people who have to be voted in. I don't blame them. I mean, after all, they're politicians. They have to go back to the voter again and again. But what is more important, I think, in this case is to be able to, in a political economy, it's always negotiation. And you can negotiate. If you talk, you can negotiate.
Where do you see with this current trend it going in the next few months and in the coming year? This kind of an inflation.
See, the point is this year the monsoon has been deficit. I mean, it hasn't been in most parts. It's not been. So therefore, it is quite possible that food production may not be as high as it has been estimated, in which case the food prices will continue to rise. There have to be widespread, which includes futures markets, which includes the role of kind of market making at this point of time by the government to be able to keep the prices not very high but not very low. They should be in tandem with what generally we would expect in an economy which is growing economy, say inflation of 4%, food prices should be around the same, increasing every year around the same manner. But then the second part of it, so this is agriculture part of structural problem of inflation. The second part of it is the inflation created by a completely distorted electricity power market. So what is happening is that we are tending to give free power. The farmer is not able to, and because I'm again saying it is farmer is not one unit. It is in fact 80% are small and marginal farmers, and their bargaining power with the markets is very, very minimal. So they are not able to recover the money. So what they put pressure on the politicians to free power, for free power, free water, etc., etc. This then again creates this distortion that we have now today, and inefficiencies that we have now today, in the sense that our non-revenue power in most of the discoms will be as high as 35 to 40%. And the third part of structural reforms is also taxation, especially the indirect taxation. Our GST has an inverted structure. So we have a lot of problem and large number of slabs. It's difficult to calculate. So we may get inflation brings us in a lot more GST. So in fact, inflation is good for the government. When we say that the GST collection has been record collection, it is basically a reflection of very high prices, because the sales are not that high. I mean, it is not that production has gone up very high. Your installed capacity is just about 80% now. Earlier, it was about 75%. Marginally, it has gone up. So you have a lot of slack capacity, installed capacity in manufacturing. Your IIP is going down, but your GST collections are going up. Okay. So basically, you are taxing inflation. And therefore, actually, it's a double whammy on the people, because inflation is being fueled by GST, because GST increases the prices, and GST gets increased because there is inflation. So for the government, it's a bonanza.
But it's at the cost of the lowest and the poorest people of India.
Absolutely, because inflation is a tax on the poor. So my sense is that we need to start looking at taxation, including duties and excise duties. I mean, if you have a chart that you had shared.
Yeah, I'll come to that question later. Yes.
But that feeds into this, that if the government collects very high taxes on fuel, it actually adds to inflation in a significant manner. Because higher fuel prices add to the cost of products, goods and services which are delivered. And that has a across the economy impact on prices. So it is not even sector-wise, because transportation is for every sector. So I think these are the three areas which you need to clearly look at. But we can talk about other two which I think are important, which is fiscal deficit and CAD, but maybe subsequently.
Yeah, so actually these three reasons that you said, they are all internal. It has nothing to do with the external factors that are driving inflation in other parts of the world. It's completely in India's own control, India's own activities. So,
partly say it is external only to the extent of rise in crude prices.
So these three factors that you said, they have always existed. So why this huge inflation now?
No, we had the same kind of inflation in 2011, 12, 13.
Yes, but then it came down. There was a spike of inflation in 2011, and then it came down. And this inflation has started from the beginning of this year, 8% in April. And then slowly.
One thing most people don't acknowledge, I think it's gone completely unacknowledged, is the fact that in the year 2012 and 13, in the dying hours of the government, the UPA 2 government had brought in several very far-reaching far-reaching reforms that turned the economy for a while, whether it was in growth or inflation or otherwise.
Can you give a little example?
Kelkar committee had been set up, and Kelkar committee had given a fiscal roadmap to bring down fiscal deficit to 3% over a period of 5 years. And they had given certain targets year-wise. Now in the 2012 and 2013, which is 12, 13, 13, 14, government actually bettered those targets, even though the pressure and the temptation to spend was so much. So I can tell you today that we had actually cut expenditure each year by around 1 lakh crores from what was budgeted to reduce the deficit. Okay. So obviously two things happened. When your deficit starts going down and the market sees you're serious about it, then
the trust grows.
And not just the trust, but you see the money available for private investment becomes more. The pressure of the government to borrow more from the market eases. So there are a lot of factors which also impact inflation, because fiscal deficit is directly impacting inflation. If you reduce 1 lakh crore from government expenditure in a year, it means that much less money government is throwing in the market. So to that extent, the availability of money also goes down in terms of, so therefore your inflation is impacted by that. So I think we have not seen, there were several other similar kind of reforms I can name, but nobody has acknowledged the fact that these were some very far-reaching reforms which impacted for instance, on LPG. When they reduced the subsidy and brought down the supply to 5 or 6 cylinders on subsidy, and rest of it was to be on market price, that itself had a huge impact in terms of subsidies going down. So I think that impacted inflation to a great extent.
So when did it change, and when do you think the inflation started rising? For what factors?
So I see the problem. I think basic problem arose in 2 ways. First was demonetization. I think demonetization was a single biggest blow to Indian economy, and we have not come out of it as yet. And therefore, while everybody says that India is the highest, fastest growing economy in the world and so on, but if you really look at it, we are fastest growing on what base? I mean, if a 19 trillion economy grows at 2%, you can imagine the amount of wealth which is added. And if you link it to per capita income, then I mean, where are we? So my point is that what happened was that demonetization effectively crippled the non-formal sector, which constitutes 45% of India's economy and provides jobs to close to 90% of the people. And that economy was severely crippled. And therefore, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, so what I'm trying to say is that, do you think today's inflation, sudden rise in inflation that we are seeing for the past few months, is the result of demonetization that happened in 2016? And are we ever going to, when do you think we can get out of it?
No, so you see, that's why I was explaining the situation. What happened was, for instance, close to 65 to 70 lakh MSMEs closed down forever.
Yeah.
So unemployment grew, jobs shrank, wages shrank. So the purchasing power in the hands of the people became lesser. And therefore, a lot of idle capacity was there. So the industries were not producing and so on. But the natural growth, which happens because of the sheer size of the people who are in the economy, which is like India is under 30 million, crore people. There is a certain momentum which happens anyway. So the demand and supply got skewed. And slowly that has impacted. So see, what if the impact of demonetization had been for 2 years, then perhaps we would not have been in the situation that we are seeing today. But it has not been. I mean, if you look at the growth, India's growth rate, from 1670 onwards, 17 onwards, it has been declining growth rate. It's not nothing to do with COVID. Actually, COVID is a boon because if you simply look at GDP number, then from -8%, you grow at 7% and you feel we are the fastest growing economy. But if you look at from 2016 right up to 2021, your economy was declining even before COVID. Unemployment was rising even before COVID. Wages were being lost even before COVID. So yes, this is a cumulative impact which is happening on the economy. It is not something which is happening in 1 year or 2 years. Of course, what happens always is there are all these underlying factors which continue to contribute and gradually contribute, and then suddenly certain shocks happen. And some of those shocks we have seen could be external shock, could be shocks that relate to like failure of a monsoon and so on. Then the prices rise. Also destruction of the supply chains during COVID because of sudden and long unplanned lockdowns. The supply chains got disrupted. All those, this is a cumulative impact of that. I think we are short-sighted to see it only in this year or 2 months or 1 month, inflation in that sense.
So in your reading as an economist, where do you see, I mean, you have seen it, what happened to it in 2016 due to demonetization and then the supply chain failure and etc. Where do you see India going in 2023 or 2024 in terms of, will it be able to come out of the catastrophe that has been done through demonetization? Or do you think it will actually grow at a pace that serves all kinds of people, or this inflation will continue?
So first, Jaya, I'm not an economist, I'm an economic administrator. Okay. So I speak more as a practitioner than an economist in that sense. But let me say this. What we see as policy measures today do not evoke the kind of confidence that we should have that things could improve in very near future. When the finance minister says, for instance, that inflation is not my red line priority, I see it as a problem. When we so if we are happy with a K-shaped recovery, which is a very fast recovery for certain sectors and large industries and things like that, but it is a decline in informal sector and MSMEs, etc. It doesn't evoke that confidence in me. And I don't see any policy measures which are being taken to reverse this trend. The monopolies that are coming into the economy again are a problem, because with a great difficulty that we had been able to create an environment of competition, obviously is now shrinking. So if there is no competition, then it also kills innovation, it kills new investment, and then it also drives monopolistic prices.
So monopolies, which industries would you name? Can you name it?
No, I mean, you look at any industry. I mean, look at any.
You can name it in the interview. We all know it, but would you like to name them?
No, it really doesn't make any difference by naming an industry, but you can look at in all infrastructure sector, for instance, all core industries, for instance, you can see consolidation of concentration into few industrial groups across the board, from communication, entertainment, media, power sector, chemicals, airports, ports, everything.
Okay, so it's naming without naming. So yeah, we can all see that. Yeah.
So once again, I believe that these large industries are important for the economy. I do not believe that we should not have large, strong industries, but we certainly must have some rules of the game in place where the economy is a little more, there's a little greater egalitarianism in the economy, and we also tackle inequality because inequalities are rising.
Yes. Yes.
And rising alarmingly. So tell me, Jaya, where do I see those green shoots or the light at the end of the tunnel to say the economy will really turn around in a dramatic manner? When I don't see any, when I see this kind of development that is happening.
Yeah, it brings me to my next question, part of which you have already answered, and that is that India being the fastest growing economy, and also in absolute terms, it has overtaken the United Kingdom, though it's not a like for like comparison, but it's a good milestone. When it is growing so fast, why is unemployment growing at this rate? And I would say that in 2019, before COVID, it was at 6.5%, which was at a 45-year high. Today, it is higher at 7.3%, and it had gone up to 10-12% in between. So why do you think unemployment is growing when we are boasting of a fastest growing economy? And what do you think would be the impact of this on the next generation?
This is one of the most serious problems and real serious problems that the country is facing. Let's forget about the 7.2, 7.6, 7.3. Let's just look at numbers. Employment in June itself in 1 month had fallen by 14 million people.
Yeah.
Okay, so reducing the workforce from 1.3 billion people population, our workforce was only 404 million in May. And it fell to 390 million in June, in 1 month. You can see the dramatic change which is happening in this, but much worse, I think, is the labor participation rate. Mass exit of labor force from the labor market. Exit means when people give up, they are hopeless. They go and sit at home, just don't even look for jobs because they don't believe they can get a job. Of course, we should also remember that there are 2.5 million salaried jobs were also lost in June. So it's not just that it is the casual labor or unskilled labor which are losing jobs, but obviously this whole idea that economy is turning around, rapidly moving up, and we have recovered, we have come back to the pre-pandemic, etc. The numbers belie that. The numbers don't add up to say that this is true.
So in this context, I would like to ask you, you were part of the policy making that had brought in the right to work and which had actually created a huge amount of employment. At the moment things stands and the MSMEs that have got destroyed and all that, what are your recommendations that can be put in place immediately that can generate employment now in India?
See, one, of course, immediate relief, which we have done in Rajasthan, which the Chief Minister announced recently, is the rural employment scheme for the urban areas. Because we didn't have for the urban areas on lines of MG Narega, and our urban employment scheme has been created, which will give immediate relief. I mean, if you don't have anything and you are in the cities, you can go and demand work and government will provide work.
What kind of work is that?
I would say that is...
Sorry, quickly.
That is casual work. So that is casual work. Casual means that they will be doing work like labor in the rural areas, they will do in the urban areas. But in case of generation of employment, Jaya, the point is we need to declutter the whole system. In Rajasthan, we did something interesting. Which was something which I had put in the 2000 budget, the 2014 budget of Government of India, with Mr. Jaitley had presented. So it was not with the earlier government, but with the new government. And I had after discussion with the finance minister, who thought it was a very good idea, Mr. Jaitley was supporting it strongly. I had inserted one declaration in the budget that government will bring an omnibus law, which will remove the requirement of prior approval or permission of the government under all central laws for a period of 2 years from the date of registration for MSMEs. Now, what it means is that in Rajasthan, we then, of course, in Government of India, that was not taken up, and so it hasn't happened. But in the state of Rajasthan, then we had pushed this year, and in 2019, we were able to bring this MSME Facilitation Act, which provides for that for a period of 2 years, MSMEs will not require any prior approval or permission, etc., from any government department under any state law. We had listed out 45 approvals, 45 to 60 approvals, depending on the sector, which they had to take before they could even start their first day of business.
Okay.
So they had to go all over the place. Some inspector will come and inspect the site and say this site is appropriate. Somebody will come and say the electricity connection is all right. And then these people had to pay because this is all rent seeking. Mm-hmm. So it was very, very difficult for them to set up businesses. Now, my point is that we have at the moment close to 15,000 registrations by MSMEs on this portal. But if 15 or 20% also succeed out of these 15,000, you're looking at 2,000 to 3,000 units coming up in a year. And if each employs even 20 people of 10 people, then you have about 30,000, 50,000 employment happening in the state. So I'm just saying we need to create those circumstances where employment generation can happen without government creating problems and hurdles. So the Chief Minister had even written to the Prime Minister requesting that a similar dispensation should be given for central laws so that the MSMEs don't have to. Today they have to go for approvals, etc., under all central acts, and which is also quite cumbersome. My point is, if central government also comes up with this, we will see a huge amount of entrepreneurial energy coming out. So I think we need to begin to look out of box for solutions for employment generation. One other thing that we have done under the same law is that if you are in an urban area and where would you start? And if you have like knowledge workers, you have a computer lab or you want to have some software company and you don't have more than 10 employees, you can do it from your home, from your garage, from anywhere without having to convert your property to commercial use. At present, everywhere in the country, you cannot do business from private premises. So these are the kind of things we will have to look for if we really want to find a solution to unemployment in the country. I mean, this is just one part of it, but like I said, there are huge number. Electricity is another. Power sector prices have to come down for industries to succeed. So that power, the cost does not become very high. Land costs, stamp duties on land, conversion costs. These are so exorbitant that businesses it's next to impossible to do business. At one point of time, Government of India used to have a market development assistance for developing foreign markets. This was for exports. So which is branding, advertising, etc., etc. I think we need another tranche of market development assistance for linking MSMEs and micro enterprises to e-commerce platforms.
I'll go to my next question, which is on poverty. So, because between 2005 and 2015, as the World Bank has also reported, and actually in many parts of the world, it was celebrated that India brought out 250 million people out of poverty, which is basically more than the entire population of Russia. Uh, that was the biggest drop in poverty in India in its history. After 2013, India stopped publishing official figures on poverty, but all research and surveys point to a figure which is around 73 to 76 million people who were added in poverty in India between 2013 and 2019. And this was for the first time in the history of India, since India had started collecting data on poverty, that poverty actually increased. Between 2012 to 2019, that period before COVID, and I'll show the data which was published in The Wire on the increase that happened, and also by Pew Research and a lot of other surveys which showed the same. Why do you think poverty increased in India after 2013?
Poverty is increased because of deceleration of the economy. See, you should also see the period of 2005 to 2011, basically, was a period where Indian economy was growing very rapidly. So if you look at the economy growth rates, an average was about 8.5% per annum, which was also one of the fastest growth periods for Indian economy.
Growth is there today also. Growth was there in between also. India showed the growth. After 2013, it showed a growth. Just before COVID, it showed a shrinking, but growth was shown, and even now it is showing a growth. But it's poverty reducing.
No, see, growth, I'm not saying it's recession all through. I'm saying the kind of growth you require. See, India requires, if you really want to tackle poverty, unemployment, and you want people to be prosperous, etc., for India would require a continuous growth, economic growth of 8% plus for the next 10 to 15 years. So when you say there has been growth, of course there has been growth. But let me give you the numbers of growth in India, GDP numbers in growth numbers. So India's GDP growth in 2010 was 10.3, right? 11 was 6.6, 12 was 5.5, 13 was 6.4. So one of the other things which is not acknowledged and seen is that the government, the UPA government itself had been able to turn the economy around within a period of 1 year. 1 year. Because it went down to 5.5 and then it went up to 6.4. So it started growing. And then in 2014, it was 7.4, 2015, 8, 16, 8.3, 17, 6.8, 2018, 6.5, 2019, 4. 2020 was, of course, minus 8%. 21 was 8.7%.
Because it was at a baseline of minus 8.
And this year's estimated 6.9%. Again, decelerating. It's not keeping up the momentum of 8.9% and up. So there has been a deceleration. It's not going up. So when you say on the growth, population growth, and the number of young people coming out into the market for jobs, etc., your growth has to be consistently 8% plus, not less, which we have not been able to achieve after 2010, I would say. So if we have not been able to do that, obviously, we can say that between 2010 to 12, we also had the impact, which was external impact, apart from all the other things that were there, of the global meltdown after Lehman Brothers happened. So that impacted us. But there were policy interventions were put in place for the economy to very quickly turn around and start growing. Right? Now, if that momentum had been continued by, say, very good economic policies, we would have again got back to 8.5, 9% growth. The situation today would have been very different despite COVID. We would have been very differently placed. So I don't think that your contention that growth has been there is right, because deceleration means the economy is not growing to the extent it should be growing. Year on year, the growth is lesser. And when that happens, obviously, it impacts everything. It impacts jobs, it impacts new capacities being done, new investments, everything is impacted. So poverty comes in because you're not having enough growth, and then you don't have enough policies to directly tackle poverty. Let me give you this example of MG Narega. I was special secretary in Rural Development Ministry between 2008 and 12. Before I became finance secretary, I was in rural development. So I very closely saw MG Narega, and everybody used to decry it, that it's a wasteful expenditure, it's taking people away from productive, there's no productive asset being created, and so on. But look at what it did to the Indian economy. Between 1991 and 2005, in the state of UP, minimum wages increased only 3 to 4 times for the rural unskilled labor. And what was the minimum wage in 2003-04? On the average across the country, if you would have looked at, it was about 35 rupees.
A day? 35 rupees per day?
Per day.
Oh.
Yes, yeah, that's it. And they had no bargaining power because they needed job. So if they got it for 35, they took it. Even if they had got it for 20, they would still have taken it. So what did Narega do? Narega did this. Initially, Narega, of course, provided 100 rupees per day on demand. So what happened was that two things happened. One, in those areas where women would not generally go out to work out of their villages, etc., started working. So the wages, women started getting wages, and because one other thing is this JAM or Jandhan and all that is now, of course, nice names. But the fact that wages will be transferred only to the bank accounts was a decision first taken under Narega. So this strongly empowered women. That was the first thing. So a lot of women came. One of the things you would see now is when unemployment happens, when catastrophe strikes, women are the first ones to lose jobs. Unemployment rate in women is much higher today than it was earlier, because the first ones to lose jobs will be women. Second, it gave the same wages to women that men got under Narega, which was not the situation in the market. So it also was gender empowering, and it was not on a small scale. It was across the country. So this was impacting across the country. The women were getting better wages across the country because of Narega. And the third thing which it did, which to my mind was the greatest impact, was that these people got bargaining power. And that bargaining power meant that they could tell the contractors who came to the villages to take them, that look, if for 100 rupees we can find job here itself, why do I want to go to Punjab? So they would have to pay them 150 rupees. I had anecdotal stories coming to me where the contractors would go and say, we'll even give advance for your student education of your children. We will give you a good place to stay. Please come to Punjab. And they got a lot of dignity, because in Punjab, the agriculture would have collapsed if they didn't have this labor. And this is the same thing with construction. So this impact of Narega was not just simply as something which provided them jobs, but it had an impact on the wages for unskilled and semi-skilled labor across the board, across the country. That's where they came out of poverty. That's how we were able to have this fastest compression of poverty. And let me remind you, it was faster than what was achieved by China in terms of number of years.
Okay.
So in the world, to my mind, in the world, it is the fastest compression of poverty in that period of time.
I'll come to the next point, which is about India's trade deficit at the moment. And this has actually run into a record high in July, which was $30 billion for the month of July. It came down to 28 billion in August, but that is also a record high. At the same time, exports on merchandise in August actually reduced from 2021 August. And imports have been exponentially increasing, and trade deficits are going on becoming a record high. At the same time, also there is something that shows that India is the fifth highest foreign exchange reserves country. But it also shows that since the end of last year, it has been depleting. Foreign exchange has been just going down. So how do you see these together? Is it alarming, or is it something very temporary which can be overcome?
We had the current account deficit has been a big problem for us forever. And also trade deficit for that matter, because we have never been trade surplus in any case, because we have been imported. But one big problem that we are seeing today is rising protectionism. It is not only in India, but it is in other countries too. But we are also moving towards this. In fact, this whole concept of Atmanirbhar is not anything new. Because if you see it before 1991, and in the first, second, third plan, 5-year plans of India, our whole industrial policy was import substitution. And we were saying we are going to produce everything in India. We will not import anything from outside. And so we were also protecting our industry by saying no imports, and we will do everything indigenously. But what happened? We became inefficient. In today's world, we cannot remain inefficient. We have to be globally competitive. And therefore, government's role should not be to protect domestic industry. For domestic industry, protectionism is a very easy way out, because India is a huge market. In any case, they can sell anything in India. So you don't have to worry about so much, putting, effort and time into quality. They also maximize their profits by cutting costs, cutting corners, as we in India we so easily say we are cutting corners. So we do that. So I think we will continue to run into this problem. Presently, the problem is much greater on account of the fact that there is a kind of a global recession. I mean, you can see United States, the inflation is very high. Europe is now coming into a very big, UK, somebody was telling me inflation is going up to 22% or some such, which is, so therefore these markets, which were our traditional markets, will not be growing in the manner where we can export more. So this is the temporary phase, perhaps we'll get to it. But this is a phase where we should, instead of doing everything Atmanirbhar, we should be making India more outwardly oriented. So we should subject our industry to greater competition, not by importing goods alone, but by opening up foreign investment, making the import-export freer. The controls on export-import should become much lesser. We should our entire focus should be only on regulating our markets through fiscal instruments, but we should stop saying that we will not allow this to be imported and not allow this to be exported. The incentive and disincentive have to be very finely calibrated to global prices. We should always keep our taxes in a manner that our price of production, cost of production is marginally lesser than what it is in the most competitive market outside. Now look at this. In India, if you want to buy, you get the best of shirts for men. I mean, you can buy, but the shirt which I buy for 1,000 rupees, which is made in India, a little better quality than that is sold by Bangladesh in 500 rupees. So we are not competitive. And it is not only true in terms of processes, but it also true in terms of input costs. So once again, the first thing that we started talking about, that we need to start structural reforms in some of the key areas like electricity, power, and so on, and transportation. These are areas which require huge amount of structural reforms to be able to make the Indian product globally competitive.
So do you think the competitiveness of Indian products have gone down in the past few years because of protectionism?
It has. So, but because we are less open economy today than we were in 2014.
Okay.
We are much more closed. There are much more restrictions. We are less open to global markets than we were earlier.
So it's a kind of deliberalization that is happening?
It has happened. I mean, that process has started. Once again, let me caution, it is not just in India. It happened in the time of Trump in US. Now they're trying to open a little. This has happened in UK. It has happened in many, many countries. So we are not the only ones going in that direction. But I think we can afford it less than Americans can or British can. We need, because they are trades, they don't have a issue of, the kind of trade surplus, impact of trade surplus that we have on our economy, they don't have. So you have a issue or situation where we are not able to, we will not be able to meet. One other problem is that we should also allow rupee to continue to gradually depreciate and find its own level. Today, it appears that the Reserve Bank of India is trying to defend it at 80. That's how we are using up a lot of foreign exchange. I think close to 45 to 50 billion has already been used up. But what is happening is this is signaling the market. So non-deliverable forward market, if you look at the rupee today, it is being punted at a little higher price than what it is, because everybody expects that the government will defend the rupee. And therefore, rupee will continue to be under the pressure and we will continue to lose a lot of foreign exchange. So I think we need to be calibrated better. I can understand that
it actually fall more than the lowest that it is at the moment at 80, nearly 80. So in your opinion, it should actually be allowed to take its own course and fall to what it is.
But very gradually. So the Reserve Bank of India's intervention should be only to reduce volatility.
Right.
So if it goes by, say, 5% a year, that's all right. I mean, I think that would make our exports also more attractive.
Okay, so here what you are saying is that within the last few years, this trade deficit, perhaps one of the reasons is because our exports have somehow taken a hit because of the lack of competitiveness and the protectionism and the lack of quality that it has brought in.
Also cost of input.
Okay.
Also cost of input.
So where do you see it going in the coming months with the current trend? Do you see trade deficit going higher with this?
It's difficult to say because much will depend on how Europe and US deal with their situation. Presently, it looks grim. especially because there doesn't seem to be any end to Ukraine war. So as winter approaches, Europe will begin to freeze, and they'll have a lot of energy problem or energy crisis. So I don't know how they will, but as long as external crisis continues, the chances of our being able to export, increase our export exponentially will be difficult. And our imports, obviously, it is difficult to control.
Right. Yeah, so it is basically external driven. We can't say it because it's sort of to a large extent the inflation of the other countries which would affect it.
No, like I said, first three are internal.
Yeah.
Cost of input, which is very much internal. So the structural reforms are necessary for that. Quality consciousness. So you have to do that as a national policy. Like Swachh Bharat, we should have a Quality Bharat campaign, which is very much required. And of course, rupee. That we need to, our currency management has to be a little more granular. Those are internal factors. The external factors, of course, are the one we just discussed about Europe and US.
Mm-hmm.